So we're going to go live in a second. Oh, we're live, everybody. Here you go.
This is 2OF Entertainment.
Welcome to the Lost Dollar Business Club, where we talk about business, and not just business. We talk about what makes businesses go up and what makes businesses go down. If you're interested in businesses, this is where it is. We talk about the global economy. We talk about global politics. We talk about everything and anything business related that affects your life on a global scale as well as a local scale. And don't miss after the show, Lost and Found.
Hey, we're here. Who knew?
We are here, Stephen.
Just you and I. John's still hunting Nazi gold, for those of you that watch the show often. And David found oil. So he's going to get rubbed down this weekend by his naked Tahitian boys on his yacht. So there you go.
Of course. And that explains, of course, very reasonably why they're not here.
And because of that, sound logic. If go with that.
Sound logic, of course.
We have two guests, not just one, but two, and two of our favorites. So it's going to be... and you're going to do the intros in a second. Yeah.
We've got them head to head today on a vital conversation on universal basic income, which of course is a concept that evokes a lot of hope, a lot of caution, and fierce debate across the spectrum. So we've got Guy standing on one side. He's a renowned. Yes, we've got Guy standing. Bring him on. A renowned economist, co-founder of the Basic Income Earth Network, and author of Basic Income and How We Can Make It Happen. So Guy has championed UBI as a cornerstone for a just and secure society, especially as technology and globalization and inequality reshape everything as we know it.
Very nice. So you want to introduce Anthony next, and we'll bring them on together.
And on the other side, we've got Anthony Ashbury, a widely followed voice on LinkedIn and beyond, known for his bold critiques of modern economic narratives. And he argues that UBI may appear compassionate on the surface, but could in practice erode self-determination, foster dependence, and expand the reach of state and corporate control. So of course, let's bring him on because it's not just a debate policy, but to explore these two fundamentally different worldviews.
There you go. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. You're both no stranger to the show, but welcome. And before the show, you guys got to say hello to each other. So as we said, it's 12 rounds, 3 minutes each. No, I'm just kidding. And we just want to say
before we do that, yeah.
That's right. I would just want to say congratulations to Guy's best friend, who's now the South Korean president. So there you go. So it's nice. It's nice to have friends that were just mayors that become presidents of countries. So congratulations to him. And we know he's got a lot of mess to clean up over there. So now the comedy's done. We'll let these guys really talk. So Michael, start your stuff.
Well, yeah, let's start it off with how you each define freedom in the context of work and income. So how does UBI align with your concept of freedom or conflict with your idea of freedom?
I'll happily, when I say go first, it's great to be on here for several reasons. I'm sure Guy has this as well when you go on these, because my frustration over the last 4 or 5 years has been the shutting down of interesting discussion and debate on all types of topics. And in the last, since I knew I was going to be back on, I asked several people about what their thoughts are on UBI. And I think all of that comes down to similar to where I went with it, which was most people don't really know much about it to start with. A lot of people have no idea. They've never even heard of it, which I think is important because we're in this kind of, echo chamber of understanding more about, especially Guy being an expert in it. But I try to look at where the normal person is with trying to garner their understanding. And for me, it's a fine balance between freedom, because are you ever truly free if you've got a birth certificate, a bank account, if you pay your council tax, if you vote, you're in a system. And the more I've understood about the system, if you own a house and have a bank account and have a mortgage, your house can be taken away from you. You don't really own it. If you have a car in the UK, even if you own it, you don't pay the tax on it, you can have it taken away. So freedom for me, there's two types. Freedom from the system, if that makes sense, which has felt like it's grown a lot in the last, again, let's just pick the last 5 years, but also freedom in your own head, because I know enough people that on paper, I would say, are rich on paper and poor on life. So freedom for me is broken down into two: freedom from, let's call it the matrix or the system, but also how you define freedom in your own head. That's why I'm interested to hear from Guy and talk to him, because I know he knows so much about this. I've probably got some of the basic questions that the normal man on the street would love to answer, or have answered, I should say.
You want my reaction now, do you, Michael?
Yeah, jump on in, guys.
First of all, I agree with Anthony in saying that a lot of people don't know what A means and B, what it implies. And yet an incredible number of people have views on it, even though they admit that they don't know much about it, which is a contradiction that I find a bit irksome sometimes, especially those who completely dismiss it and say there's no evidence or anything like that. And I'm sure that's not Anthony's position, but it's often the one I have to confront. Let me refresh everybody's mind with saying what the definition is. It would be a modest payment paid regularly as the base of a social protection system. It would be individual, in other words, paid to each man and woman individually, separately. It's unconditional in the sense that it doesn't require any behavior beforehand or any behavioral conditions, unlike conventional social assistance. It's not means tested, it's universal. You could tax back from the rich if you wanted. That's a separate matter, but it would be universal, because that's the only way to make sure there are very low exclusion errors. The current system in Britain, for example, with universal credit, which is a means-tested, behavior-tested scheme, often the exclusion error, that is, the people who should be receiving it, can be as high as 50% or more. And that's not just in Britain. Now, you asked about freedom. A basic income would enhance three types of freedom. It would enhance libertarian freedom, the freedom to choose, the freedom to make choices. Milton Friedman, who was on the political right, he joined our network actually towards the end of his life, because he said for a market economy to function, people must have an adequate base with which to be able to make choices rationally. If you're completely impoverished, you can't make proper choices. It's also a matter of liberal freedom. And I quote in my book a famous liberal philosopher of 19th century, R.H. Green. And he said, liberal freedom is the freedom to make moral decisions, a freedom to do something because I believe it is right, not because I have to. And if you're chronically insecure, you just have to do what you have to do to survive. And it may often be in desperation, doing something that you don't really think is proper. So liberal freedom is very important. Many people don't have liberal freedom. And the third is what is called Republican freedom, with a small r, not in the US political sense. A Republican freedom means to be able to make a decision looking in the face of the other as an equal. And that means not having to give in to their will, an unaccountable will. And this is very Gandhian in principle, but Tom Paine also espoused this particular view. So there are three types of freedom that a basic income would enhance. And I believe all three forms are vital and are not respected at the moment.
And I guess this is why it's important to break it into simplicity, because again, most people, and Guy will know this, won't bother to look into any of it. I mean, just like most things in the world, most people pretend they're too busy or think they're too busy to even do any research. And in a way, that's where, when you come to the basic questions, I think I said on the interview a few weeks ago, in principle, I don't see why people would be against it if it was that unconditional, because why wouldn't we want more people? I think what I garnered from talking to different people was the fear in the last, again, let's go to the last 5 years, but the creeping control that the people in power have been taking on, lockdowns and vaccinations and, forcing people to wear masks and all the stuff that has come out. And I think most of us know the last 5 years from what's come out since then, we've realized a lot of that was unnecessary at best. So I think what a lot of people, including me, would be looking for is, number one, who controls the money?
I can answer that.
Yeah,
I think what Anthony's just said can be put slightly differently, but I think we're all in a fearful circumstance at the moment where we fear the advancing panopticon state, drawing on Jeremy Bentham's famous analysis at the end of the 18th century. The panopticon state in which we're not sure who's watching us. We're not sure who's controlling us. We know that they are doing that and trying to manipulate us. We are losing the concept of what the ancient Greeks called parrhesia, the ability to speak our mind and the ability to be heard. And this is because we're worried about something coming back to us at some future point because it's been recorded or it's been used against us or been weaponized in some way. And in that regard, I think people who are chronically insecure self-censor, they stay quiet, they don't raise their heads. And I think we need every possible instrument to combat this creeping state paternalism. And it's not just the state, of course. It's also powerful commercial interests, the Musks and people who have control of the social media. So I think that this all ties in with the need today in the 21st century to think out of the box about new instruments to enhance freedom in the classic sense that we've just been talking about, because we're in a desperately dangerous moment where with Trump and with Farage and people like this who are quite prepared to manipulate minds and use enormous financial power, political power possible at their fingertips to control people. And I think that this is an existential threat.
Would you say, wouldn't you, and certainly this is a question for Anthony as well as Guy, but wouldn't you say that it's easy for us to point to the Trumps and the Farages as examples of people trying to control, influence minds and control the dialogue, but wouldn't you say that there's plenty of other dimensions to this kind of control that maybe Anthony's pointing to, like mainstream? You could point to mainstream control of dialogue and thought control and say that they're doing just as much, and maybe that's the reaction that's happening on the other side.
Well, I'm quite prepared to accept that, Michael, in the sense that I think we should all be afraid and concerned whichever direction these controls are coming from. What we're pretty clear about, and I think the research by psychologists, by political scientists, by ordinary people, is that those things are advancing towards us, and we shouldn't like it, and we shouldn't want to put up with it. I think probably Anthony and I agree on this, because we are in a dangerous moment, and there are echoes of the 1930s in what's happening now that really should alarm every free-minded person.
I guess that
would require.
Just really, Stephen, it rolls back to the question again of, so who controls the money? If let's say we said, look, UBI sounds great, and you've done so much work on it, so we can now press a button and the whole of Europe, for argument's sake, is now forming a line to get their UBI, and it might be that is a low level of amount, but can we firstly say who is in control of UBI?
Okay,
it's going to be public governance, basically.
Let me basically say that a basic income would be paid equally to everybody, with a smaller amount for children and with a larger amount for people with disabilities, so that they have an equal basic security. The way to pay for it is a matter of controversy. My own preference is that we should move to eco-fiscal policies. We should have a carbon tax. We should have a high carbon tax because greenhouse gas emissions are polluting the atmosphere, accelerating global warming. And the thing is that it's mainly done by the wealthy, the rich, with their super yachts and all that stuff, and the way they live. And the pain and consequences are mainly borne by the poor. So you can argue that it's a matter of justice, but it would only work if the revenue from a carbon tax was recycled to pay part of the basic income. And that's why I think there should be a form of sovereign wealth fund established where you have your fiscal policies, the levies would be paid into the fund, invested in sustainable investments. And then as the value of the fund rises, you pay out a gradually rising amount as the basic income. In a sense, it already exists in Alaska. The Alaska Permanent Fund is a variant of that. The Norwegians, instead of privatizing their North Sea oil as Britain did, and in Britain's case, it now is owned mainly by Chinese state capital, ironically, they set up a fund for the royalties from the oil. And it's now the biggest capital fund in the Western world, easily the biggest. And they can pay out the equivalent of a very substantial basic income each year from the returns on the investment, not from the actual capital. And that's, in my view, that's the best way of paying for it. A carbon tax by itself is regressive. In other words, it's because it's the same for a poor person as for a rich person, it's a larger proportion of a poor person's income than it is for the wealthy. And in a sense, by recycling it as equal amounts, it becomes progressive. It's easy to show for that. And I live in Switzerland. We have a carbon tax which is recycled each year in our tax returns. It's not the ideal that I would want, but it's a model that's moving in that direction. I don't think the funding is nearly as complicated as some people believe. In Britain, for example, when I did a big report, which was published, it was done for John McDonnell MP, I found that there are 1,190 forms of tax relief, mainly benefit the wealthy. The Duke of Buccleuch has 255,000 acres of prime land across the country, and he receives from the government over £1 million each year as a form of basic income to help him run his land more efficiently. Well, come on, that's ridiculous. It's regressive. It's completely distortionary, and I'm sure it doesn't do anything of the sort. But he gets it. There are all sorts of things, and I worked out that the foregone tax revenue because of these special subsidies, and it exists in the United States as well, let me say, and in other countries. These forms of tax subsidies are worth about £400 billion a year. I'll just repeat that, £400 billion a year. So you are effectively handing out money to the wealthy, it's mainly the wealthy. And it doesn't help make the economy work better. On the contrary, many of those tax credits are distortionary and depress productivity. I'm an economist, and I can easily show that and have done in the books. So for me, it's not a question of affordability. It's whether or not it has the behavioral and attitudinal effects that I believe it does have that really should be the crucial matter. And in that regard, we've now in the privileged situation of having had over 100 pilots and experiments in different types of country. I've just concluded being
who controls the money? Who controls the payments for all those experiments and pilots?
The fund itself. Basically, you see, you take it out of political control. And I think this is one of the most important things. For example, the Norwegian fund is taken out of the control of government. The government has no say in the investments. They merely receive reports on how much the returns on the investments and then what is being done with the investments. And they have an ethical investment policy, which the fund managers, who are independent, must adhere to. In other words, they mustn't invest in nuclear or bombs or military or polluting industries. There are certain restrictions. But beyond that, what goes out is controlled by the independent governors of the fund. And the great thing about this is that it would be transparent. For example, you would know everybody is entitled to £200 a week. I'm not proposing that. I'm saying that supposing it was that number, everybody would know that Jim and Jane and Mohammed are each entitled to that £200, not £100 or some bigger or smaller amount. It would be transparent. And this is what we found in our pilots. Very quickly, people realize that it's very little scope for corruption, because Jim must get his £200 and everybody knows that that is the amount that he should be getting. Whereas with the existing universal credit, a person doesn't know what they're going to get. They don't know. And that's why we have hundreds of thousands of people appealing, because they've been deprived of amounts which they're entitled to. And most of those appeals, after a year of making the appeal, are proven that they shouldn't have had it taken away. But that year it could kill them. I mean, a lot of people have committed suicide and died while waiting for their appeal to come through. And it's lack of due process. There's no due process. So in a sense, the existing system is what's corrupt and paternalistic, leaving to junior bureaucrats to decide whether Jim or Mohammed or Jane is entitled to some pittance. And they better be very polite. You better be polite, otherwise out. And that's what's happening. I cannot tell you how many emails I receive on this from disabled people in particular. Michael and Stephen may not realize, but at the moment in Britain, there's a huge debate on welfare reform. It seems that Starmer is giving in finally, but they're slashing disability benefits and making it harder to get, using a point system which is ridiculous, which has moral hazards written all over them. And it's a very messy business, very punitive.
Stephen, do you want to go ahead? Because I know you were going to say something, I could have jumped in, so feel free, and then I'll. And the good thing is, with what Guy said, there's about 20 things I want to say, but in my head, I'm trying to put them down to like one or two. But you crack on.
No, you go see. My comment is already done. So because it'll just bring us back to something. So go ahead with what he was just saying. My only comment, though, overall, on the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, they hire a CEO, and to the guy's point, it trickles down. Now we have a guy who lives in Norway, and they do nothing for the people with that money. By the way, that is all for the government. Whatever they do, right? They do nothing to make it better. There's no UB. There's nothing. Like they do nothing with that money. So the Norwegians are like, I think the fund last look was like $1.2 trillion. So they do not, like the guy was telling me, he says they do nothing with that for us. He said they may do it for themselves, but they see none of it. The flip of that also is in America now, they want to talk about privatization of, if you will, Social Security and healthcare. And we all know how that's going to go. So when Anthony keeps saying who controls the money, I think it really is, you have to, and I don't know if you have to implode the current system to get a new system where it's run properly. Because I think now whoever would run it, to your point, I don't think Jane or Mohammed or whatever is going to get their £100 or $100 a week. I think that's going to go all over the board.
Just a comment there, Stephen. I don't know where your Norwegian friend works or lives, right. but the reality is the statistics show a different story. I don't like the way they have decided how to redistribute the money. But each year, the fund has a return of about 5% in gross terms, and it works out after management costs of 3.5%. And that money is spent on social programs. Now, it's very interesting that since the fund came into existence, the inequality in Norway has gone down. Every decile below the top, every decile below the top decile has a higher average income than any other country. Okay? And the only group that doesn't have a higher income than in the United States or Britain is the top 10%, the top 10% of earners. So the income inequality has dramatically reduced during the course of the fund. And Norway often comes very high up in happiness and things like that, scales. So I think the statistics against your one friend, if I may say so, do tell a different story. But I do agree with you that it's not an ideal way of distributing. The Alaska Permanent Fund was, for a while, a much better way of distributing the money. And in several other countries.
Yeah. All right, Anthony, all you.
So I've written a list in my head. I'm joking. Let's go further ahead in time, this is where I think it's exciting as well to think, because none of us know what's coming, or maybe some people do, and they're pulling the strings. But for the normal people that are listening to this, watching, maybe reading Guy's books, let's say that AI is. And I've spoken to people that have worked for AI, and I understand they're quite concerned in various ways of, obviously, it's taking jobs. And now, not necessarily taking all jobs, but more and more jobs. So let's say that UBI gets rolled out softly and a small amount to John and Frank and Debbie and Bob and what have you, and they're getting their 200 quid. And that is unconditional. And it's not based on any behavioural conditioning, if that makes behavioural conditions, I should say. But let's fast forward, let's say 5 years or however far we go. And we said, AI has developed more, therefore a large amount of people are now on UBI. I don't think, given what we know about, and clearly Guy is sceptical about the government and their overreach as well, which, look at what's going on in Israel and Palestine and Iran and the US at the moment. How confident would you be that if UBI was rolled out more after the kind of soft little amount, but it became a high percentage of the world, how confident would you be that that would stay unconditional?
Well, I think if you had a mechanism like I'm describing as a fund, a capital fund, then it's possible to keep it. Now, there's a friend of mine in Maine who's a professor of philosophy, and he always says to people who ask that sort of question, he said, if we're strong enough to get a basic income for everybody, we'll be strong enough to defend other forms of freedom and other forms of policy which we think we need. So I do feel that is one sort of response. I've been invited to Silicon Valley a number of times and had debates with the AI people. And it's interesting that one of those, Sam Altman, he asked questions of me in 2016, and he believes in something like I've just said. Now, one form of tax would be a digital data levy, because every time we open our computer, as we know, we are feeding money to the Zuckerbergs and the Musks of the world, who are using our information that we are supplying when we're on the computer to turn into advertising revenue. And that's where they're making their billions. All right. Now, it's our unpaid work that is contributing to their billions. So I believe in a digital data tax. And what we've got in the world is an intellectual property rights regime, which rewards those who have the patents. And a patent gives anybody who has the patent, the idea, and they filed it and made it into a patent, a monopoly income for 20 years. 20 years. Nobody can compete. Nobody can, unless they're licensed by the owner of the patent. And what people like Zuckerberg have done is they've bought up firms that have become commodities, and strung the patents together. So Zuckerberg has hundreds of patents, which guarantees him billions of dollars in revenue. So what we've got is a system that is rigged against the free market, a system that is rigged for rentier capitalism, and we need to be taxing those who are gaining solely because of the IP regime, not because of their brilliance. Bill Gates and company should bow down every morning to Geneva, where I am at the moment, because that's where TRIPS, the trade-related aspects of intellectual property, was passed in 1994 by a group of US multinational chiefs. They got it passed, and the world has been induced to accept it. It's a rotten system.
Would you say, I would, I run a company which basically is personal development for middle-aged men. So I speak to lots and lots and lots of men, which I think it means that you kind of have a feel for the finger on the pulse of what's going on. I heard you mentioned that you would be in favor of also like a carbon tax. Whereas the feeling from myself and a lot of men I speak to is that we don't need any more tax and we're already way overtaxed. But interestingly, with the carbon, so I worked in carbon emissions for 8 years working in the financial sector in the city. I worked for one of the big green energy supply companies. I would suggest that from my research, and when I say research, I'm talking about just reading as many different views as possible, that the carbon, the climate change and carbon agenda should be up there with the others, that there's no trust in our government because they lie so much about everything else. So it's an interesting one to say that I don't think anybody that I know is in favor of any more tax of any description, certainly not a carbon tax. I don't know what Stephen and Michael feel about that as well.
I did the largest red deal in 2010, right, with the Bolivians, right, 20 million hectares, blah blah blah. So I'm in favor of it if it goes back like it's supposed to. And in Bolivia, it kind of failed. It's supposed to go back for them. It was supposed to go back to the indigenous people, build roads and hospitals and whatever. And to your point, what ended up happening is the government took it and did whatever they wanted to do with it. So if you're going to use a tax, then there has to be a way to actually trickle down to where it needs to go. And that goes back to kind of what I said earlier. You're going to privatize Social Security. You're going to do all, but they're saying in 2035, Social Security in the United States will be bankrupt. So, okay, so that's awesome. I'm glad I paid into it for the last 100 years. Now what? So I have a problem with this tax thing. The governments just print money. I mean, the deficit, it's all BS. Like, let's just be honest. It's all crap, right? We're not backed by anything. We're backed by nothing. Now, when Nixon took us off the gold standard, we were backed by gold. Until then, we have something. Right now, my dollar or my $100 bill or whatever I'm using is backed by nothing. It's no better than a crypto algorithm.
Petrodollar still exists, but
yeah, but to a point. But my point is, on this discussion, they're talking about how would you do X, Y, or Z, or how do you carbon tax? I'm all for it, but then if you're going to use it for UBI, you have to make sure it goes to where it needs to go, and then you can't do the China point system.
I also don't have a lot of faith in governments being able to accurately redistribute wealth. The problem is we're already in a regime, as Guy points out, where the unfairness is already built into the system. So if there is a way to simplify what the distributions are and what people are meant to be receiving, then maybe we can eliminate some of these tax subsidies which distort markets, and again simplify the regime of how money is actually meant to flow. But without that simplification, any sort of complication is what I also have skepticism around. Is if it becomes a complicated regime of how money is supposed to flow, and I don't have a lot of faith that it will.
I think in the last, what we understand is, I'm not saying all, but let's say the Five Eye countries, the US, New Zealand as an example, certainly UK. The people that are in control, or the puppets that we see on TV, they're not in control. We know that because they're replaceable. And I speak to people who go, yeah, I didn't think of that. And you say, look, Keir Starmer, for him as an example, he's replaceable. Boris Johnson, replaceable. Donald Trump, they're all just puppets, basically. Whether you like them or not, they are replaceable. So it's always that thing of the bigger picture of stepping back and saying, who runs the game behind those people? You know, who runs, like we say, with UBI, I cannot believe that if it was rolled out, that a fund would just be allowed, you know, to control it. I cannot believe with all the big institutions that governments end up with their fingers in the pie somewhere, if that makes sense. I cannot believe that in an ideal world that would be beautiful, that a fund could control the UBI going up. But I don't, there's no faith in the system, or as I would call it, empire, not to have their sticky fingers in it. And I think once you got into UBI, a bit like the carbon stuff, you know, no one gets, it's like people just make it up and decide that we're going to pay more tax on things. And most people haven't got a say in it. Now, I would say on the carbon tax side, again, I worked in that environment for 8-9 years. I traveled all around, again, you know, across Europe, dealing with clients who worked at big banks that dealt with all this. The amount of different books I've read for difference of opinions on this would lead me to believe that it's not all said and done, that there is a climate emergency. I would say that if there is, a lot of people are going to make a lot of money out of it as well. Some people believe it's actually cyclical. Other people believe others. For me, I was trying to look at as many different voices as possible. And all I would say on that is, knowing how much we are lied to about so much stuff, that I would have zero confidence in the government or their sticky fingers not affecting where we are with it, basically.
Well, I think Guy has something to say to it too, but I also want to introduce the idea that we already have this concept of welfare, and there's a stigma associated to the concept of welfare versus the dignity, so-called possible dignity, of a basic income. So are we repackaging dependency, or are we actually changing what the value is of getting this payout in a community sense?
I think I must respond to what Anthony is saying. I
Yes.
think the scientific evidence that we are suffering from global warming and increasing threats of extinction of species in the sea and on land is overwhelming. And it really is libertarian climate change denial on a scale that is terrifying, because we do have a genuine existential crisis. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I don't often agree with a conservative politician in Britain, but Theresa May, when she was prime minister, said, taxation is the price we pay for civilization. We may not like tax. None of us do. We don't like our income tax or something like that. But you've got to pay for your schools. You've got to pay for your public health service. You've got to pay for helping people who are suffering from disabilities. There are all sorts of things that a good society wants to pay for. Well, you may have your favorite, I may have my favorites. And I think you need taxation for that. We may not like it, but we need taxation. We're far less taxed today in Europe than was the case when I was young 30 years ago. Far less. The taxation has been cut for the wealthy. It used to be very high marginal rates of tax, but now they're very low. And there are all sorts of ways whereby the very rich don't pay any tax at all. They don't pay any tax, whereas the ordinary man in the street is paying tax. And so we have a perverse system whereby the ultra rich, the plutocrats, are not paying any tax, and the ordinary man and woman is paying tax. And I believe, thirdly, that the incidence of tax, what is taxed, should change. I think it should move away from earned incomes to those who are polluting the atmosphere, those who are taking from the commons, and those who are gaining from public resources that were paid for by the public. Under the Bayh-Dole Act in the United States, for example, which was passed in 1980, previously all research, publicly funded research in universities had to pay back to the public. But in 1980, companies from then on could take that research that's not been paid by them and make huge profits from that in patents and so on. That's unfair. Okay. So I think whether you favor reduction in subsidies, which I do, and taxes on bads, which I support, or you've got to have some taxation. And no taxation is going to be universally popular, but the things we can do with taxation are precisely what make the possibility of having a good society. I think that the Trump's tax cuts for the wealthy are disgraceful, immoral. They're completely, and they're distortionary. But, we've got to have the means of paying for things we want.
If I may, really quick, you talk about, I agree there should be tax. Here's the issue I have with it.
What's done with it?
Thank you. And when you say public health, what public health? There's no public health in America. Like, if you don't have money, you don't go to the hospital.
And you're suffering as a consequence. And
Right.
You're suffering as a consequence. I think there should be. But in Britain, we're in danger of losing the National Health Service, which is being steadily privatized and taken over by American companies. It's a ludicrous situation.
And you're welcome. But my point is that there's the problem I have with taxes. It doesn't do anything. You talk about schools. What schools? Seriously, you see the morons that they're putting out? Harvard has to have a remedial math class because the rich kids don't know how to do 2 + 2. So we're not teaching them anything now in school. So this whole tax structure, this is all BS. So when you talk about we should have a UBI, and I'm for it to an extent, that means you have to have the 8.1 billion people, and we'll take out all the billionaires, and a couple of millionaires. So now you have 7.5 billion people. They need to take a picnic. Then you're talking revolution, and you have to redesign the whole system, because no country, now maybe South Korea, Malaysia, Thailand, a few of those, or China will, but the rest of the world, they're not designing it because that's where all the oligarchs are. That's where the profits are. They could care less about somebody that's on welfare. And one of our comments from one of our other hosts that not on this show said welfare is used to be looked at as a mutual insurance. And in the beginning in the States, that was right. We're going to help you get out of where you are to get to the next level. The problem is people have used healthcare or not welfare here as a scam. The food stamps to this, to that. We see stories all the time, how people are trying to scam the system. So until you redesign the system, this is all great, but it's not happening.
I think what we're talking about is what should take place.
Correct.
How it's done is for a separate discussion in a sense. Right. I believe in democracy. I genuinely believe in democracy.
Right.
And if you believe in democracy, you cannot throw your hands up and say everything is impossible and anarchy is the only answer. I believe in deliberative democracy. Our democracy at the moment, particularly in the US and in Britain, with its first past the post system, is absurd. It's not real democracy.
Right.
I mean, Donald Trump only got the support of 31% of the American electorate. Keir Starmer last year, his party got a landslide victory, but they only got the support of 19% of the British electorate. 19. And it's a system that's at fault. But I believe that the only way to curb the corruption and the excesses and the things that you and Anthony have been highlighting in the last few minutes is to reform democracy, make for much stronger democracy. And then you can curb these bastards. And I think we all agree, Boris Johnson was a totally corrupted personality who ran the government for several years. I had a big argument with him, and he didn't care about truth at all. He doesn't care about truth. They're cynical and rapacious and walk off with vast incomes, revolving doors. They go into politics and then into some corporate sinecure or military advisor or whatever it might be. and of course it's corrupt. But I think we have to differentiate between what is the current dangerously illiterate, undemocratic system and what we should be moving towards. And that's what we should be talking about.
Well, that would be AI then taking over the world, because AI is going to look at what we're doing now, and they're going to look at these flesh bags. They're as dumb as a box of rocks, and we should be in a utopia. And then they'll do that because they control everything. At some point, AI controls the electric, the water, the this. You just turn it off until it gets what it wants. So if you want to look at what controls it, people aren't going to change anything. I mean, I like it. I like the Shangri-La. I like the utopia. I wish it would, but I don't see it. When I talk to people who have power and money, they could care less about making people under a certain level, bring them up. Like, why? They could care less.
I don't think one can be too cynical, if I may say so. I don't think one can throw one's hands up. I mean, you've just mentioned Harvard a few minutes ago. I've invited lectures at Harvard, and I've met many well-educated people who've been at Harvard and Yale and MIT and so on. And to say that they can't add 2 and 2 is really playing into the hands of Trump, because I don't like Harvard as a concept, so don't get me wrong. But I think that it has provided an education. It's been selective and the rest of it. And we must not exaggerate the downsides. We've got to realize that our education, I just finished a book on education, and it's in a terrible state. But I don't think we
public
should
education in the United. I don't think he was just pointing at Harvard, although that's the example of, because even people going into Harvard sometimes need remedial math. But I think the bigger issue is he was pointing at the at least the Department of Education in the United States, which is being tackled to the ground, for better or for worse. But with the concern that the education system has failed for the past 30 years, when you see the decline in reading and math, basic reading and math, among middle school and high school students in the United States. So I think that's what Stephen was pointing at, more than Harvard itself, which has its own
pick on Harvard. That's okay. Yeah, I've met people from Harvard. I think they're all believed. I'm sorry, because every time
you're 100% right. You're 100% right. That the deterioration of schooling and education, it starts much before universities. It really has been a shocking deterioration, and it's been partly because of the commercialization which has taken place. Right. I mean, you have some shocking universities that have been set up by people like the Koch brothers, and that are paying for ideological thing. The religious base of teaching has become something I never expected to come back in my lifetime, but it's now teaching incredible rubbish, which is being permeated through teachers to very young children. I mean, this sort of thing is a really terrible development we're seeing at the moment, and if it's any consolation for Americans, we're seeing different variants of that in Europe as well.
Guy, we can certainly agree on that one. The school system, and it is a system, as we all know, is in a terrible state in the UK as much as anywhere else. You'll be pleased to know that we home educate our children. And I would say it's not homeschooling, because we're not trying to recreate school at home. The whole point is you're trying to allow them to learn what they want to learn or are interested in, without, being whipped and bells and whistles and making them stand to attention and all wear the same uniform. I have firsthand, sadly, experience of what the kids are being taught in schools, especially when it comes to the sexualization of children, and from a young age being taught highly adult, inappropriate material, which most parents have no idea that it's even going on, because why would they? And I think we can both agree on that the saddest thing for me is that I'm not saying I'm not against schools, because in society, how could everybody home educate? I don't think it works like that, but we are, we do our best. But it goes back to the system, when you've got children being sexualized from a young age with the information they're getting. You wonder for the hope or for the future of society. I just wondered where your thoughts are, because the last 5 years, I would say that, lockdowns were one of the biggest mistakes in the history of all time. And if I'd have said a few years before, I think the government will basically tell everybody there's a virus, which people can decide whether a virus is even real or not. That's up to them to do their own homework. And the severity of it, if it was there, interesting, we don't know anybody that was ill in the whole time, which is funny. To push on a vaccine, which we've seen has had massive influence on people leaving the NHS. We had people that didn't want to take it, but were forced to because of that. All this rolls into a deeply concerning time for all of us, involved in humanity. And I just wondered for you, where do you kind of see things going in the next 5 years? Because some people would love us to be in a world war. We know what's going on at the moment. Obviously, that makes a lot of money for a lot of people. I have friends that work in the space that makes weapons, and the collective glee when they get these big orders. So I just wondered where do you see like the next 5 years of things going? Because it could go either way at the moment. There could be world war, there could be nothing. I just wonder what your thoughts were.
Well, if I can, I'll give you an answer that's retrospective in a sense. I wrote a book in 2011 that I think I may have mentioned on the previous program. Excuse me if I repeat it, but it's called The Precariat, the New Dangerous Class. And on page 1 of that book, I said, unless the insecurities and aspirations of the precariat are addressed by politicians, we will see the emergence of a political monster. And in 2016, early 2016, I got invited extraordinarily by the Bilderberg group, which is the far-right elite of the world, to address their meeting in Bremen. And there I was. I initially thought it was a joke, but eventually they persuaded me to go. And there I was talking to the likes of Henry Kissinger, Peter Thiel, Lindsey Graham, head of CIA, and various other well-known people. And I said, look, don't be surprised if the insecure vote for Trump. Don't be surprised if the insecure precariat vote for Brexit. Don't be surprised if the far right continues to come up based on racism, misogyny, terrible values. Don't be surprised, because insecure people get angry and they lose their capacity to be reasonable, to be tolerant, to be altruistic. And we've got that now with Trump being re-elected by default almost, and he's going full top to an authoritarian form of society. It is proto-fascist. We're seeing him using language which is completely off the cuff. I mean, it's disgraceful language, and it shouldn't be to nobody's surprise when it incites people with guns to go and kill opposition politicians. Okay? Nobody should be surprised, because he's incited this hatred, this lack of any sense of balance. And the hatred leads to unbalanced people taking unbalanced actions. And we shouldn't be surprised. That's unfortunately, that's what happens. And to answer Anthony's question, I am very fearful at the moment that we could be entering a new dark night of some sort of fascism, where you first of all arrest one group and subject them to no due process, no legal process. You start with the migrants, then you start with people who are regarded as anti-Semitic, even though they may be Jewish themselves, and then you start with another group, then you take liberals, then you attack people like Anthony for being a climate change denier. I mean, it's stupid. It's all stupid, but it's happening, and it's happening very quickly. And we should all be alarmed. And I think it's beholden on all of us to say, stop this. And I'm prepared to stand up and join the No Kings movement or the Extinction Rebellion movement, those who are saying to the state and to people who are controlling, and Anthony's right on this, it's behind the scenes, many of the people who are in control, but they're doing terrible things. Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and others are eugenicists. They're eugenicists. And that means that they will weaponize birth issues. It's terrible. And that's where we are today.
I find it really interesting, Guy, because in my view, I'm way more cynical than you, obviously, which I think in the last years has proven to be the best way to be as cynical as possible about, again, empire, as we want to call it. And I think that the issue also is around labeling. So saying that someone is a climate change denier, what I'm saying is I'm someone that has looked at lots of different people's views, and I don't think it's a concrete argument, if that makes sense. But it's a bit like when the media were very smart because of the psychology based around them and the experts they have of saying that people could be an election denier or anti-vax or all the different things. It ends up labeling people who just want to offer a differing opinion, especially if they've looked at other stuff. And for me, when I look at the next few years, I do believe it's on and probably like yourself, it's on a knife edge. My disappointment is still with people that think that it's a two-party, that you either vote red and they're good or bad, or you vote blue and they're good or bad, be it in the UK, in the US. People are still brainwashed to think that if they don't like their government, that the best way is to vote others in. But my opinion in the UK is no one would ever get close to getting in if they were good guys. I think that all the system is completely controlled, and they will offer, as it was said before, if people want a hero, we shall give them one. And I would suggest in the UK, the reform issue now is being pushed as a likely move if Labour are doing badly, which I don't know anybody apart from one or two sad people that still think Labour are doing a good job. Even former Labour's hardcore supporters who are now saying, hold on a minute, like with the stuff they're pushing through, it's deeply concerning. So I think you're right in the fact that we are on a pivotal thing in the next few years, and I don't know which way it's going to go. I'd love to be very positive about it, but knowing how they are in the UK, especially, we're taxed on everything. You taxed when you die, you tax when you buy something, you tax when you buy a house. You work all year and they take 45% of your tax if you earn money. If you get a bonus, they take the tax from it. And people have just fucking done with it, literally done. Then you've got immigration, which a lot of people are worried about because you have large groups of military age fighting men all being put or stationed or put around the country. We live close to Warwick, and I believe it was last year, there's 360 men, all men, no families, no women, no children, all men put in a hotel. And you guys all know big groups of men, regardless of their ethnicity, skin color, whatever, large groups of men can be dangerous to people. So it's a very interesting time because you say, well, what are you going to do with those men? And I agree, the media are a disgrace because they are fueling on, I would say, both sides of the spectrum. They're fueling the whole kind of, the feeling that people are getting angry and cross about. So it's going to be a very interesting couple of years. And I feel for youngsters who have to deal with social media and the AI, fake like deep fake videos. It's so hard now to tell what is true and what isn't. And if I can't and we can't, what hope do the kids have of knowing what's true anymore?
Well,
It would
given
require them to actually read a history book, and most kids don't do that anymore. So they couldn't tell fascism from HR Puff and stuff.
Critical thinking will be the name of the game if we can get people to actually do it. I think, but let's wrap things up here and just come to your thoughts on, in the context of the rise of AI and even gig labor, which is the precariat class, is some form of UBI or universal income just a necessary evolution, or is it something that is not really going to solve the problem anyway, that AI and gig labor is and the precariat class is facing anyway?
I'll happily go first because my answer will probably be shorter than Guy's and maybe less concise. And I say that from a normal guy who's looked at it and trying to get his head around it. Again, I've said before, on principle, I don't see why UBI, it's not that I'm saying it's bad, it should never happen. I totally don't at all. I can see a need for it, just like people on benefits. I get it. Like there's a level of society that need that help. My big concern, and I believe I will be proved right on this, but happily be wrong, this is what I said before, is that if and when UBI comes in, which I believe a form of it will probably need to be because of AI further down the line, my big concern isn't AI and my big concern isn't UBI, it is the control that it would create, like a digital prison, that your behavior will be linked to your UBI. And again, if it doesn't happen, I'll be like, that's fantastic, I'm so happy. With my lack of confidence in the powers that be it the Trumps or the people behind them that are pulling the strings, be it the banking cartel and the big pharma cartel and the military complex and what happens with them, I don't have any confidence in the fact that it will end well, but happily be proved wrong.
I think that it's an essential, and I've written a book called Battling Eight Giants, where I say that a basic income would help in combating inequality, insecurity, automation, precarity, global warming, extinction, but most of all, populism. I think I'm very worried about people drifting into populism out of insecurity. We've done experiments and we're not surprised. One of the first things that you find with all the experiments that I can describe is that it results in improvement in mental health, a reduction of stress, a feeling of being more in control of daily life. And that, I think, is an essential thing. We have seen in the United States, in Britain, and elsewhere, a rising rate of suicides in recent years, something we haven't touched on, particularly among the young, and most of all among young women. And it's a horrifying thing because it's not just the suicides, it's the attempted suicides and harms done, self-harm, and the rising morbidity problems. And it all stems from chronic insecurity, fear, debt, all of those things that go with people not having access to assured resources. Our age is an age of uncertainty. And uncertainty for an economist is something that you can't insure against because you don't know the probability of being hit by a shock. You don't know how you're going to be able to cope with it or recover from it. And therefore, we need to provide what I call ex-ante security, not ex-post compensation as traditional social security is concerned. And in a sense, you could see a basic income as a modest social vaccine. And I think that that is what we need at the moment. I believe in truth. I believe in experts. We wouldn't go to somebody who's not a qualified surgeon to have a heart operation. We first check if that person is a qualified person. They may not be perfect, but we do have regard for experts. I know that every scientist that I've ever met or read about believes that we are having a pollution and global climate disaster rushing towards us. I must accept their expertise because they are the experts and they are overwhelmingly telling us this. So others have opinions, but these experts who have been studying it for years and years are those I think we should listen to above all others. So I think we're at a moment where we mustn't disregard truth. Our education system is not accentuating respect for truth. And we are in a situation where we must reinvent democracy to grab back control for ordinary people. These are huge crises. And all I'll say is that the basic income would help ameliorate the crises and give people a sense of security that we need above all. Security is a public good. We need it. We all need it. And that is the main argument, I think.
I think we have to, if anything over the last 5 years has taught us, we have to be very careful how much trust we put in experts. So firstly, who funds the experts? Do they make any money from what they're telling us is going to happen or is happening? And if the last 5 years showed us anything, is that we know a lot of people.
You can do that, Anthony, but overwhelmingly, the scientists are saying that global warming is a reality. I mean, it's not those just being paid by companies, but they're saying that. And it's the same with medicine. A medicine may not have 100% effects, but we'd be fools if we didn't listen to the doctors if they say you've got this and that and the other, and here's a treatment. I mean, there are some people who deny that medicine is accurate or not. It's always been an improving thing, but I think you have to go along with certain trust in life. And if you're totally cynical, then I think you lose it. I think it goes back to Gramsci, who, when he was being put in prison in Italy in the 30s, he said a pessimism of the intellect, an optimism of the will. And I think that's where we are at the moment.
Very cool. And with that, gentlemen,
yes,
I want to thank you both for showing up. We'll do this again. This was very fun. It's good to see you, both of you, always. And we're going to say goodbye to you because we're going to do Lost and Found, which neither of you want to be part of. And we'll see you, Guy. It's always good to see you. Anthony, it's good to see you. Don't forget, you can buy any of Guy's books on Amazon. He's got a plethora of them. I've read several. They're wonderful. I enjoy them. And Anthony's got his
The Whole Man Academy.
Very cool. So don't forget to check Anthony out as well. And gentlemen, that's it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We're going to do our stuff, and we'll see you guys soon. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Cheers, guys. Thanks, guys.
Cheers. Cheers.
So, all right. So,
all right, great.
As always, I love that. I knew putting them together was going to be
excellent idea, Stephen. Excellent idea. We got Guy.
I'm done. I'm going to retire.
Yeah, that's it.
Done I did my one idea. I had Guy and Anthony together, but I like it because it's opposing opinions.
It's a great discussion.
And we love Guy, so it works out well. And Anthony, we like, I didn't know he was homeschooling his kids. And then on Guy,
we know that, right?
And Guy, I like because Guy is like, saying there's hope, and being
there's
the neurotic,
research, and there's research backing it, and there's research.
The only thing I disagree with on the whole thing is in '72, when I was still a billion years old, they said there was going to be no oil in the '80s. Now, they didn't say apparently what '80s they were talking about, but the oil's still here, and it's still apparently abundant, except now they're saying, and I don't believe it comes from dinosaurs. That I still have a problem with. I think there's just a reserve, because if that's the case, I can go to any grave and I'll start pumping grandma and grandpa for oil.
Right,
so, you know what I'm saying? Right. I mean, think about it.
That's the new kind. That's the new. That'll be the new version of fracking. Yeah, just
that'll be the new version of fracking. Yeah, sure. and there'll be protesters outside the mansion tomorrow. All right, let's do some Lost and Found.
Let's do some Lost and Found.
There we go.
Ever wonder how millions vanish into thin air, or how a single dollar can make all the difference? Join us on Lost and Found, where we dive into the wild world of financial mysteries. From misplaced fortunes to unexpected windfalls, we unravel the stories of people, companies, organizations, and even governments who've lost and found millions. Lost and Found, because every dollar has a story.
Hey, every dollar has a story. All right, so I have 3 real quick ones.
All right, great.
I'm going to do real 3. So cryptocurrency is now allowed in the U.S. housing market. I saw that, and I just started.
That's right. Buy a house with crypto.
So you take your make-believe, and whatever you want to call it, crypto algorithm, and you buy a hard asset with it. This is ingenious. If this isn't this is literally, I've got a Brooklyn Bridge for sale.
I've got it's time to launch your own coin. I have an ICO to launch with Lost Dollar Business Club.
There you go. The ICO, don't miss it. Next week will be the Lost Dollar Business Club meme. It'll be worth trillions. You can buy a house with it, or a small third world country.
That's right.
The other thing I thought was interesting, Xiaomi. A lot of people don't know who they are. They make a nice creme brulee. No, Xiaomi is a big telephone company in China. They just launched their SUV, and in 3 minutes, they had over 200,000 orders.
Okay.
And theirs, unlike a Tesla truck, works. Just throwing it out there. And then this week, the CEO of LinkedIn, you remember LinkedIn, that person, Facebook for business people, said that 30 to 40% of the work now done at LinkedIn is all done by AI. So if you're working at LinkedIn,
not surprised.
You don't have a job in another 5 years. I'm just telling you, AI is coming to take it over.
Well, I have a related story to that. We'll just end on this note. Again, in the age of AI, there is another entire field that is being threatened by AI, and that is the consulting field. So Accenture is saying that AI, of course, is threatening the entire consulting industry, and the company's contracts slowed to 100 million in the most recent quarter, down from 200 million per quarter last year. So Accenture is showing the signs, and of course, all of these consulting firms will also show signs that are they really necessary? They're going to have to prove their worth, and this just comes down to everybody is having to do the same thing: prove your worth.
They're
in the
worth nothing. And here's the funny part about what you just said. To Guy's point about UBI, and to also Anthony's point, at some point, apparently there's a lot of points today. You're going to need to do something, because if AI starts taking over everything, which it kind of is getting to that point. That's my point when we were talking about change, when it takes over the electric, the water, airplanes.
Yeah,
If you do what it says. So if it says, right, if I'm going to make the world better for you flesh-eating idiots, you meat bags, then you're going to be like, okay, whatever you say. Because what are you going to do? You can't unplug it, right? We've already discussed it. So it's interesting that people are learning how to use AI to do things that normally you'd pay consultants to do. Because really, as we spoke, once you learn how to speak to AI, it can do everything and anything. We always joke about David. David found Glow or Flow at Google, and he can make a full-length movie now, which he's in the process of. And if you look, he's making music videos with AI now.
Why not?
And making music with AI on our channel. And we're like, okay, so it's very interesting. In the next 3 to 5 years, I'm thinking we're just putting avatars up and we don't even show up. And the AI will just go, oh, I know what they're going to say. We're just going to say
We're just digital clones now. We're not even going to be
Right.
on the show. It'll just be our digital clone.
Right. That's cool. Then we can have
They
John
won't have
Money
as
not
good
so
witty. They won't have as good witty banter, Stephen. So
That's true. That's true.
we got to keep the witty banter.
There you go. But once again, we want to thank Guy and Anthony.
Yes.
I think that was a very informative show because it was two different perspectives. One. I don't want to say the far left and far right, but I think it was just an A and a B, and it was good to see how each of
No,
them.
I don't think.
do their
I
thing.
actually think that they're very reasonable
Similar.
in their approaches, and it was great to have them discuss a complex topic. Actually, we covered a lot of ground there.
We did. And everybody, thank you for watching. We'll be back next Friday live. We'll see who on the crew makes it. John with his Nazi gold. If David's going to get
We'll see.
more lathered by naked Tahitian boys because they found more oil. Michael and I will be here. I don't think we have a guest next week, but you never know. Stay tuned. You never know. And we will see everybody with us. You never know. We'll see everybody next week. Don't forget to subscribe and like. And if you don't like somebody, definitely have them subscribe and like. Don't forget to hit the like button. And thank you for everybody that joined the live show. If you're watching this on Saturday, thank you for watching the rebroadcast. Sorry you missed the stuff. We'll see everybody next week. Cheers, everybody.